South Stream is very important both for Bulgaria and all of Southern Europe. This project will ensure energy security.
Prevent construction of the Russian gas pipeline that is bypassing Ukraine, and because it endangers the energy security of Europe.
Ukraine is a part of Europe. We expect that in time it will begin to pay for gas at European prices. Political leverage will not stand. We're not going to pay $500. Taking into account that we did not receive ratification from Bulgaria, under the present conditions, Russia cannot go on with implementation of this project.
On December 1st, 2014, at a press conference in Ankara, it was announced that Russia had pulled out of the South Stream project and was launching a new one, the Turk Stream pipeline. At that moment, the really big game began. Kuyköy, a tiny dot on the map of Turkey. Only 2,500 people live in this town. These are ordinary people with very ordinary problems.
These ovens are installed in our homes. I sell exactly the same kind. Thanks to these, we heat our houses.
There's no centralized heat supply in the old buildings, and many people just cannot afford to heat their houses with gas.
We really would like to have gas too. It is the 21st century. Everybody has it, but we still heat our houses with wood. This is both funny and bitter.
Ibrahim Ishil is owner of a small restaurant in northwest Turkey. He opened his business in 1990. He badly needs gas.
I use gas for everything. To heat my home, here in the restaurant, I use it for everything. Even our hot water is heated by gas. After all, I have a gas boiler here. It costs money too. We have to wash the dishes a lot. This is a restaurant.
Italian Mariana Piccolo is a teacher from Milan. For household use, she prefers gas.
When I came here, this house was already connected to a gas supply. I prefer gas because it brings warmth and comfort to our house.
According to Mariana, it is not just a matter of convenience, but the price.
I once lived in an apartment with an induction stove that ran on electricity, and it was much more expensive. You can use electricity if you don't cook a lot, but I'm Italian and I like cooking and I do it often, so I prefer gas.
Most residents of Athens, the capital of Greece, use diesel systems to heat their homes.
And in many buildings here in Athens, they don't switch on the heating system. They cannot afford that. So energetically, we are really poor in general. I wish we had a gas system because it's cheaper, it's comfortable, and really is more affordable.
Much as one would like to, it is not so easy to install a gas boiler. You need money for replacement and permissions from the corresponding authorities.
Usually, people prefer to use electric radiators at home. When you heat a house with electrical appliances, the electricity bill increases dramatically. You cannot control it. You just have to keep track of your budget. In my experience, people freeze at home every winter.
The lesson of life without gas was something Europeans learned well when in January 2009, hundreds of thousands of European homes lost their heating. Heaters disappeared from the stores in just a few hours. To warm up, people were forced to burn wood. 13 European countries were cut off from Russian gas.
Gas is certainly very important for the European Union, where it meets 25% of primary energy demand. It provides electricity, it provides heating for the residential and commercial sector, and it provides also high temperature heating for. Not all European countries have the same access to diversified sources of supply. Western European countries do, but Eastern European countries, and especially Southeastern European countries, don't have access to very well diversified sources of gas, so they're very much dependent on Russian gas.
In the energy crisis of 2009, the affected countries blamed Russia, which in their opinion shut off the valve, using it as an instrument of political leverage. Why did the issue of building new gas pipelines to Europe go beyond the continent? Whose interests collided over the South Stream pipeline? What are world leaders really afraid of? And for whom is Russian gas like sand in the wheels? For 50 years, Russian gas has been flowing to Europe mainly through Ukraine. This former Soviet republic inherited the most extensive and developed network of pipelines in Europe, with a total length of over 38,000 kilometers. It consists of 22 main gas pipelines, the most important of which, the Urengoy-Pomory-Uzhgorod, Progress, and Soyuz, were built in the 1970s and 1980s. In fact, up to 90% of the gas transit from the Soviet Union to Europe was through the territory of Ukraine. And it is precisely this transit which has become the subject of the most serious political conflict in the 21st century.
Russia has always used gas as political leverage over Ukraine. And the new government, the new leadership of Ukraine, is doing everything it can to get rid of this dependence. All I can say as a European consumer and a gas importer is that these conflicts do not help. They go beyond these countries. They affect supply security issues, and this should not be encouraged.
Cooperation between Russia and Ukraine on natural gas has always been on two simultaneous aspects: transportation of gas to Europe and the supplies for the internal needs of Ukraine.
The problems with Ukraine began at the time when Gazprom decided to bring the gas prices for the former Soviet republics to the common prices that were the average in the European markets. This was because of the fact that for 15 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia continued to subsidize the former Soviet republics, including Ukraine.
And only one of them, Ukraine, perceived the gradual transition to market prices as a personal insult.
On December 31st, 2008, the terms of the gas supply contract to Ukraine expired.
The new contract means a new price which is totally unacceptable to Kyiv. Negotiations reach a stalemate, and then the transit of Russian gas to Europe becomes the subject of blackmail. On December 31st, 2008, Ukraine declares that it will not guarantee gas transit to Europe and warns of the possibility of its confiscation. January 1st, 2009, in light of the termination of the old contract, Russia stopped supplying gas for Ukraine's internal needs. At the same time, the volume of transit to Europe is increased. From January 1st to January 4th, 2009, 65.3 million cubic meters of transit gas, which is destined for Europe, is held in Ukraine. January 5th, 2009, Gazprom demands that Ukraine compensates for the gas that has not been received by Europe at the expense of its own resources. January 6 to 7, 2009, Ukraine shuts off all 4 valves through which Russian gas flows to Europe. 15 states are affected: Hungary, Serbia, Macedonia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Greece, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic, Austria, Italy, and Romania. Russia's response follows immediately. Gazprom cuts off gas supplies to the border with Ukraine.
Gazprom says that Ukraine has shut all 4 pipelines which send gas to Europe.
Starting at 11:30 p.m. European time, Ukraine began to systematically block the remaining functioning export gas pipelines.
Gazprom is continuing to blame Ukraine, saying its irresponsible behavior led to serious gas shortages in a number of European countries, and that Kiev alone is responsible for these fuel prices.
What is the gas supplied for? It's not just about gas. It is the general plan of Russia to destroy Ukraine. This is not only a question of money, it is a question of reputation, because they are persistently trying to pin the responsibility for the events of January 2009 on us, although it is not entirely clear why.
Never before has Russia's reliability as a gas supplier been questioned, and the crisis provoked by Ukraine could inflict a severe blow to the reputation of Gazprom as a business partner.
Russia is a reliable partner. Russia has proven this with many years of uninterrupted supply. Well, except for the situation when Russia entered into a conflict with Ukraine, and, well, Europe was the victim of this conflict to some extent.
But who benefited from undermining the credibility of Russia? Perhaps someone who's going to enter the European gas market? So maybe the Russian-Ukrainian crisis of 2009 was provoked by someone. And behind Ukraine's greed, are there someone else's interests involved?
In the 21st five-year plan, the development of large regional production complexes will continue. There are enough oil and gas reserves in the country to meet both domestic needs and exports.
The construction of the first Soviet gas pipelines to Europe in the late 1970s was accompanied by military conflicts and state takeovers, the imposition of economic sanctions, and the bankruptcy of the world's largest companies, espionage and casualties. It was the first energy game that was played on the Eurasian chessboard.
I was in the Pentagon at the time that we looked at the first oil and gas pipelines coming out of then Soviet Union, and the massive effort there was to get the Europeans to stand down from accepting energy from the Soviet Union, because the concern was that it could be used as a political weapon.
The USSR's readiness to conclude a new contract with us, which will be valid until 2008, that is, until the next century, demonstrates the technical capabilities and reliability of the Soviet side in providing supplies.
The first Western European gas contract was signed with Austria. Gradually, other European countries joined it. Soviet gas was much needed for Europe, but these actions interfered with somebody else.
There are two versions of the development of those historical events. The first is that America was placed at a disadvantage by the economic strengthening of Europe, and by getting cheap Russian gas, which was close and was quite inexpensive, they would face a powerful competitor in the international arena. And there is a second version, the fact that at the moment the United States was actively considering the option of supplying its own coal to Europe. And so it would be worth talking about direct fuel competition between American coal and Russian gas.
There were very strange stories concerning businessmen who considered Russia to be the most logical supplier of energy carriers. Well, Probably the most vivid story is the fate of the creator of the Eni concern, Mattei, who realized that Russia could become a reliable supplier of energy resources to Italy. It was during Mattei's tenure that Eni signed the first oil contracts, and they were about to sign the new gas agreement. But on one beautiful, clear, sunny day, Mattei's plane crashed while it was on approach to land at the Milan airport. Until now, no one has been able to clearly explain what happened. There have been a lot of books and films on this topic, all of which give the portrayal with the very clear conclusion that Mattei was killed by agents of the CIA.
In 1980, the USSR began negotiations on the construction of a new gas pipeline to Europe known as the Urengoy-Pomorye-Uzhgorod.
I was the chief of the negotiation groups in Austria, which was the first one I signed. Then, in Italy, Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and France.
Soon after the start of negotiations, the United States imposed an embargo on trade with the USSR. The formal reason for this was the imposition of a state of emergency in Poland. The Soviet Union was then accused of carrying out repression of the Polish people.
There are many admissions of the United States that while the construction of the Urengoy-Pomorye-Uzhgorod was in progress, the events in Poland were largely provoked by the United States in order to prevent this construction. I repeat, there are confessions of American officials, the leadership of the CIA, that they did that.
Then in the 80s, Washington demanded that its Western European allies join the sanctions. However, Europe continued to defend its own interests.
Well, these events began. Nevertheless, Reagan issued his famous decree and imposed sanctions on the supply of rotors. The rotor is the most important part of the gas turbine. Without it, nothing can be done. We did not expect that he would do this. There were threats, but we didn't expect this action.
Then the Federal Republic of Germany stated that their agreement was concluded before imposing the embargo and was therefore not subject to sanctions. And Britain and France insisted that the existing contracts with the USSR would be fulfilled. The Italian press directly wrote, "The United States is waging war against Europe." And in the end, the Reagan sanctions were lifted.
In the summer of 1984, I worked in Baumgarten. Now, everyone knows that this is the largest hub, the largest center where the system converges. I worked there, accepted gas, signed all the documents with the Italians, the Germans, the French. It was international. And once, we drank a whole lot of schnapps, because the radio, television, and everything else said, "Soviet gas comes to Austria," and we understood that there was a greater supply now. Everyone celebrated.
Then Europe acted as a united front and was able to defend its interests. Why is everything different today? A rally with 50,000 participants marched through the streets of Bonn under the slogan, "For friendship with the Soviet Union, for security in Europe." Today on the chessboard of Eurasia, each player pursues his own interests. And if in the countries of old Europe, businesses can still explain to politicians that cooperation in the gas sector with Russia is beneficial, in New Europe, things are different.
They are heavily influenced by the United States. It's all clear. From morning until night, the U.S. demands that they refuse to cooperate with Russia. The well-known players are Poland and the Baltic countries. Poland, historically, to put it delicately, does not like Russia, and Poland does not trust Russia. And all the time, it is repeated that at any moment during a political crisis, Russia can simply turn off the gas, leaving Polish consumers and, above all, Polish industries without raw materials.
And the main raw material for Poland is coal. However, the peak of production in the country was passed 30 years ago, and since then, it has been gradually decreasing. Natural gas is the remedy. The question is, where should Poland take it from on a more profitable basis?
We have been using this appliance for 15 years. Yes, of course, we will continue. We're very satisfied, but we have no alternative either. Of course, a big plus of such an appliance is that it does not take up much space in the house. Thus, we don't occupy square meters of living space. The battery occupies only half a square meter.
Vladimir Kudryshov lives in the city of Avgustov, where most houses are heated with gas.
This tank is for a home of more than 200 square meters for 5 or 6 family members. Our family can use such a tank for a year or even a year and a half. Almost 2/3 of Poland's supply of natural gas presently comes from the east, from the Russian Federation. The contract with Russia is effective until the year 2020. But according to the statements of the government, this contract will not be renewed because the Polish government wishes to purchase gas from other locations.
This marine receiving terminal in the Polish town of Świnoujście was built in order to receive liquefied gas from Qatar and the USA.
Politicians who are currently in power, they almost openly say that it is much better to buy even more expensive gas, but from an ally and friend, that is, from the United States or other Western countries, than it is to buy cheaper gas from Russia, who is the sworn enemy.
So far, its price is working against American liquefied gas. In 2017, it was 80% more expensive than Russian gas. And this is only the wholesale price. For the consumer, the overpayment is actually double.
Heating of a house of 200 square meters costs about 6,000 to 7,000 zlotys per year for a family of 4 to 5 people. So an increase in prices by 80% or 100% is insane. That is not the way it works. Our politicians need to think about what people are saying.
As I say, this is not done primarily for economic reasons. It's done for strategic reasons. It's done in order to put under American energy dependencies other countries that we want to maintain a satellite status and make sure they don't have other sources of energy.
From the viewpoint of American geopolitics, the U.S. cares about everything. All regions. That is, there is no such region or country that would be of no interest at all. And in the Balkans, these interests were especially numerous. Overall, from 1992 to 1993 for the USA, the countries of the former Yugoslavia, well, first of all Serbia, were such important areas of foreign policy.
This oil refinery is located in the Serbian city of Pančevo, just an hour's drive from Belgrade. Vladimir Gagic has been working here for 21 years, and he remembers the 1999 events very well.
I was a plant manager then. We were bombed day and night. I myself was here during one of the NATO bombings. The factory was blazing. 3 of my colleagues died. All of our most important installations were destroyed. Our firefighters showed tremendous courage while fighting the fire, especially when one huge tank caught fire, although it seemed to us that this was the end. In 2016, I actually spoke in the city of Novi Sad. This is Serbia. And the Serbian Minister of Energy was present there, one of the people who makes decisions. And one of the first to speak, there was not even an American ambassador, but a young girl, a representative of the American embassy, far from the most significant position, telling us, "We are unhappy with you. We are closely watching you. It is a disgrace that you continue to purchase Russian gas. We are giving you notice." So the Minister of Energy of Serbia listened to all this and then apologized and asked, "Well, do you know where we are to get our supply of gas from? It will be more expensive, and it is unclear what the sources are."
It is ridiculous to even think how American gas should reach us in the Balkans, by inflating airships with gas. But many then repeated that instead of Russian gas, we will have American gas, and people believed this.
If in the 20th century the United States could not take the European energy market with its coal, then in the 21st century, they placed their bet on liquefied gas.
We're becoming a force in the natural gas industry globally, which obviously spurns a lot of geopolitical interest between U.S. and Russia. And that right now is where most of the battle at the moment is happening.
The South Stream gas pipeline was to bring Russian gas to the Balkans.
This project was to be one of the key infrastructure and development projects in Serbia, thanks to which Serbia was to become one of the most important points of gas transit on the map.
However, when implementing the South Stream pipeline, Russia faced an all-powerful opposition.
In general, this project is very politicized. And it was politicized before. And now the discussion with our colleagues from the European Commission have been rather difficult.
Work on South Stream began in 2006, and almost immediately it became obvious. Not only were the interests of Russia and Ukraine colliding, but to whom else did this project become an obstacle, and why? Back in the early 2000s, Russia realized that Ukraine could not be counted on as a reliable partner. Then the construction of the transit-independent Blue Stream for the needs of Turkey and the Nord Stream for Western Europe began. At the same time, the South Stream project started. These steps were regarded in Europe as an attempt to kick Ukraine out of the game.
There is competition in coal, for example, when there are different routes and means of coal delivery. There is competition in the transport of oil and oil products, as well as various ways of delivering it to consumers. There are different routes, including by sea. For some reason in the gas industry, it was decided out of the blue that the only way is through Ukraine, and that there could be no other routes. There must be routes because there must be competition.
South Stream was the second large-scale project that should be implemented after the Nord Stream in order to minimize the volume of deliveries along the territory of the Ukraine. It was assumed that there would be 4 lines with a capacity of 15.5 billion cubic meters. The southern and southeastern countries of Europe were to become consumers of this gas.
We are on the Bulgarian coast, very close to the city of Varna. You can see it. That's it over there. Do you see it? In about 20 kilometers, the South Stream pipe from the Black Sea to the Bulgarian coast should enter in here.
Yordan Yordanov worked at the South Stream Transport Company. He was engaged in the construction of the onshore part of the pipeline. He was responsible for the construction site of the receiving terminal, its electrical needs, and equipment.
Of course this is sad. How can't it be? Such a project was lost. I feel hurt. Our politicians conducted it in such a way that we lost. But I can tell you that every nation deserves its rulers. In other words, we ourselves are to blame, and nobody else. First of all, this project was not realized due to the position of the European Commission, because of the position of the European Parliament in Bulgaria firsthand, which did not issue a building permit in time.
On June 8, 2014, Bulgarian Prime Minister Plamen Orešarsky gave the order to suspend work on the project's construction of the South Stream gas pipeline. This happened immediately after the meeting which Orešarsky held with representatives of the U.S. Senate, John McCain, Ron Johnson, and Christopher Murphy.
We are consistent with the Prime Minister and the government of Bulgaria in that the primary task is to ensure energy independence from any country, and that means dealing with independent organizations, with those who would not depend on Russia. What they told him there, what information was shown him, we don't know. But the fact remains. That is, it is an officially recognized story. That is, it was not some secret visit and not some secret meeting in the bunker. It was a public communication, after which the leadership of Bulgaria changed its decision 180 degrees. It goes without saying that in this case the United States, well, one could say, simply ordered Bulgaria to abandon this project and all the money that Bulgaria could receive.
Former Bulgarian Prime Minister Plamen Orešarsky is currently working as a university lecturer. He emphasizes that he was an active supporter of the project.
The South Stream subject was not present in my conversations with Senator McCain and his two colleagues. We talked about the situation in the region as he directly asked me, how can I help the country? I asked him for assistance in Brussels so that the processes related to the allocation of funds from European foundations would be smoother, as well as for assistance with other problems that the country had at the time with the European Commission.
Apart from McCain, Sofia was also visited by European politicians who urged the representatives of the Bulgarian government that this project should not be allowed to take place. In other words, it was a whole campaign to prevent the construction of the South Stream, and I was not surprised that this project failed.
Yes, if you look at the formal side, the European Commission opened the penalty process. There were strict requirements to stop making new agreements with the Russian side. We, in fact, had no choice. You ask how the decision was made? We directly executed the order of the European Commission. I myself was an investor in this project. This project, South Stream, was not implemented because the European Commission did not support this project. It was a political decision. Bulgaria lost the most from this.
According to preliminary estimates, these losses ranged from 700 to 800 million euros per year for 50 years ahead.
You don't immediately understand how big this mistake was, but so many years have passed. I wanted to add regarding the United States. In Bulgaria, the United States halted 3 major projects related to Russia: Belen, the nuclear power plant, South Stream, and the Burgas-Alexandroupoli pipeline. All these 3 projects were stopped after pressure from the United States.
The game has come to a deadlock. It seems that there is no way out, and Russia has to give up.
Everyone believed that the European Commission would decide the fate of the project during its negotiations with Gazprom, while the European Commission would kind of take a strong side and would dictate its terms to Gazprom. And the fact that, as a result, Russia seems to have recaptured the initiative, well, this really came as a complete surprise.
On December 1st, 2014, Russia pulled out from the South Stream project and announced the launch of a new one, TurkStream. This part of the energy game ended with a gambit, when, for the sake of gaining a strategic advantage, you have to sacrifice something. The game has moved to its most dramatic and creative part. How will the balance of power change, not only on the energy map, but also on the political map of Europe? The Black Sea coast of Turkey. Near the town of Kirkey, the laying of the first line of the TurkStream pipeline comes to an end. Every day, the world's largest construction ship, Pioneering Spirit, travels more than 4 kilometers.
The most challenging section was the one when laying took place on the continental slope, from a depth of about -80 to -90 meters to 1,500 meters. It was necessary to figure out the correct speed of pipe laying. the pipe should gently lie on the slope so that neither indents nor pipe streams would occur. And so it was such a tense moment when we all climbed down this slope for the first time and watched how everything was happening.
When you're installing a pipeline in an area like this, imagine that you are standing in front of your house, you take a piece of chalk, you draw a line on the pavement, you go up to your second floor balcony, take a string of spaghetti, then you close your eyes and you lay that string of spaghetti exactly on top of that chalk line. And you don't miss that in a single spot. Now, this is more or less comparable to what we are doing in offshore pipelay. It's very challenging. It's maybe one step below the space technology.
A little more than 10 years have passed since the launch of the new gas pipelines, and at this time the volume of transit through the territory of Ukraine has decreased by almost a quarter.
Ukraine is desperately clinging to transit. And it looks strange because Poroshenko's official position is that we should break all economic ties with Russia. And then there is the question. If you want to break all economic ties, then why don't you want to give up the transit?
I think we have a tremendous amount of influence in Ukraine. Remember, we're talking about the post-Maidan leadership in Kiev, who maybe are all at drawn daggers with each other and are fighting like scorpions in a bottle, but they all look to Washington as kind of their godfather. They all look for favor from the government that helped bring them to power in the first place.
Ukrainian politicians count how many days Ukraine has been fine without Russian gas.
Our politicians are proud that we do not buy gas from the Russian Federation, although everyone understands and knows that we are, in fact, buying gas from Russia. Only through Western countries, but it's really our Russian gas. It may not be written as Russian gas, but if we talk about the origin of the molecules, it is Russian gas.
Was the game worth it? Simple math shows that it wasn't. The price of Russian gas when buying directly was $225 per 1,000 cubic meters. When taking our gas from outside countries, Ukraine already pays $310.
To my way of thinking, Ukraine will go on trying to undermine Russia's authority, as long as it's allowed and while the West supports it. But conversely, Ukraine experienced firsthand that without Russian gas, it's a constant grind. I think that Russia is already fed up with these games, and the time has come to stop them.
Well, you know, the whole premise behind the American and also to some extent European critique of Russia as an energy supplier is that the Russians can play politics with this. And as far as I know, they want to sell.
Europe needs natural gas in the amount of approximately 500 billion cubic meters. Of these, about 130 billion cubic meters are produced in Europe itself. The rest has to be imported. This can be done with the help of pipelines, mainly those from Russia.
And everyone in the Balkans knows and remembers that even in the times of the Soviet Union, gas from there reached its European consumers in time, even when the Iron Curtain was firmly in place. And it seems to me that everyone, both in Europe and in America, understands that Russia is very interested in export sales of its products, through which it replenishes its budget.
The trust, trusting each other. When there is trust in a marriage, it is good. We can rely on each other, on the fact that Gazprom delivers the necessary amount of gas to Austria. And Gazprom, in turn, can count on the fact that we provide our consumers with Russian gas. And if we have difficulties, on the basis of this trust, we can also jointly solve the bigger problems we may have.
The practical part of the game is in full swing. The end of the game is still far away. Now there's a major clash, where moves and maneuvers are unpredictable, and the result often depends on the psychological strength of the opponents.
Well, I think that is the default mode of American policy, to always keep tightening sanctions and to find any pretext to do so. The worry from the point of view of the people behind this policy, and they don't seem to be fully aware of it, is that they overplay their hand. That at some point they do something, and maybe the JCPOA pullout is going to be a catalyst here. They do something to make the Europeans grow a backbone, and they finally say, "Genug, we're not doing this anymore. Enough. We're not going to go along with this anymore." And they realize they have more in common economically with Russia than they do with the United States. And I don't say that in terms of hostility. Look, we're not located in Europe. Has anybody noticed? Does anybody look at the globe of the world? We're over here in the Western Hemisphere. We have no reason to have this very hands-on attitude toward Europe. And the only reason we do it really is to keep Russia excluded. And I don't think that's in the American national interest.
While the opponent is considering the next move, Russia has completed the construction of the first line of Turk Stream. In 2019, Europe will also start receiving Russian gas, no matter what route it takes after Turkey, through Bulgaria or Greece. The game goes on.